in which venues and in what ways are values learned outside of the classroom. And that's what we're going to be exploring. I'd like to, first of all, introduce you briefly to our two speakers. First of all, Ms. Maisa Jalbout. Ms. Maisa is a recognized leader in the field of education and development and was recently appointed, I think that's right, as CEO of the Abdallah Al Ghareer Foundation for Education. Okay, so welcome to you, Ms. Maisa. His Excellency Saif Said Gurbash is the Director General of Abu Dhabi Tourism and Culture Authority. He's also a member of the Economic Development Committee of the Abu Dhabi Executive Council. Mahaba, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm going to give both speakers an opportunity to explain a little bit more about themselves and what they're doing, and in particular to ask you what your opinion is of moral education in general, and maybe more specifically about the program specifically. So, Maisa, over to you, please.
Assalamu alaikum.
There we go.
I'm really honored to be here today and to talk to such a distinguished group of educators. Jesse, the presenter, earlier asked how many of us think that principals or still remember their principals and they had an impact on them. Personally, my principal in high school I looked at him as a legend, as somebody who had a huge impact on the way that I looked at education and on my potential and my future, further education. And I'm sure there are many of you here today whose students look at them in the same way. It's such a privileged position to be in, to be a principal and to be an educator. I am somebody who is not in the teaching industry, but I am someone who is actually supporting educators and supporting students in reaching their potential. My current position is the CEO of the Abdallah Al Ghareer Foundation for Education, where we, on behalf of our founder, Abdallah Al Ghareer, and the Ghareer family, are looking for the students, Emirati students and Arab students who have tremendous potential and would like to continue their education and to study in areas of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics at university level. We're also hoping to be able to work with students at the high school level to support them earlier on so that they can make a successful transition from high school to university and to start thinking about their career, about their aspirations, about what they want to achieve in their life after education, and to think about also the kind of person they want to be. And so much of our programs are not just about scholarships or not just about education within the classroom. It's really about supporting students in a holistic way, because we really view education as, it's really about potential, it's really about opportunity. And so when I think of this idea of moral education and the moral education curriculum, I believe that it is really, the UE is, and its leadership and the Ministry of Education are absolutely correct to be thinking about this as an integral part of the education system and the experience that a young person has to take away from their schooling. But we're here today in this session to talk about moral education outside of the classroom. And the message that I want to leave you with, based on my experience and the experience of my foundation, our foundation, is that education is not limited by the boundaries of a school. It's not limited by the walls of a classroom. Community and experience and community service is an integral part of that education. And for every experience that a young person gains outside of the classroom, it very much reinforces what they're learning inside the classroom, whether it's science or whether it's about making correct choices or caring about the environment or being an active member of their community and their family. So I'll leave it at that and then come back to some more depth a little bit later.
Shukran, Maisa. Your Excellency.
Thank you. So just to confirm, your question is about the importance of this outside the classroom. Just to connect, I think I'd like to start off with a very simple sort of analogy or a statement. We're very much focused on the quantification of education, on having students excel in science and mathematics and all of that, and they'll be quite excellent in these areas. But the advantage of also teaching them moral education is that you're going to teach the student whether he should do good or bad with all of that intelligence and knowledge and excellence he gains. So starting with that, I think the importance of moral education outside the classroom, it's unparalleled. And I'd like to cite a few examples where, as a tourism and culture authority in Abu Dhabi, we help reinforce whatever these students learn in this subject. First and foremost, and these are examples that one can use in other regions. We organize workshops for children, arts, culture workshops, painting, sculpting. We organize visits to sites, and we work very closely with our colleagues, both in the Abu Dhabi Educational Council and the Ministry. Imagine, you reach a day where every student is forced, or it's mandatory for them to visit a cultural site and react to it. And the reaction should be uncensored. You should allow them to express openly and freely what they feel upon visiting a site, whether it is the monastery in Sir Banias Island, which is open for visitors, and the messaging there, just to echo what the chairman said 2 sessions ago, and it is part of their DNA at the end of the day as Emiratis. There were different civilizations and religions living here, and you have to accept that in a sense. To other elements. These are small examples where you curate the visit for them, you work with the principals, with the schools, you prepare the students to go in there ready to receive whatever content they receive at these sites and then react to them. And the reactions could be verbal, or it could be things like the workshops we do where we allow you to, we teach you to express, to paint, to sculpt, reacting to a certain visit. I think these are important, and especially when we're talking about the historic sites. And one small example as well, I'd like to give. In one of our historic sites, I believe it's either from the Bronze Age or the Iron Age, I cannot remember, a certain skeleton, usually the skeletons are crammed into the tomb or the burial ground. But on this particular one, there was a skeleton on the left by itself, whereas the rest are on the right. And after studying and assessing the bone density of that, it was discovered that this person was a child who died from polio. And it just showed you how back in the day they taught them also to, as part of your moral education, good values, take good care of those who are ill, who are needy. So she was placed differently, gently on the side. And we take this, you add that nice story to it, and then you push a value to that student. And that's how it sticks in a sense.
Sure. Thank you, Your Excellency. I think that's a great segue into the first question that I want to raise with you both. So we'll come back to you, Maisa. So it's a question I asked at the very beginning. In which venues and in what ways are values currently being learned outside of the classroom in this society?
Well, I think values are, start with the family, with the community, with everything and everywhere a young person has the chance to interact with. I think that in a society like the Emirati society or the Arab culture, values are a central pillar of the family and the community. But today it's a very different time than when I was growing up, or most of us here were growing up. Values are being challenged. Ideas are coming at young people fast and furious through technology. So you can't guarantee that what you learn in the home or what you learn in the school is in fact the values that young people are going to adopt, because they're being exposed to different ideas and thoughts, and they're being challenged from every part of the world by their peers online. It's not just the friends they go to school with. So the idea is that we need to sort of pitch our tent a little bit wider than we originally think about how we embed those values in young people. We need to provide information that counters much of the negative information that's available out there. But more than that, we need to provide them with the skills to be media literate so that they're able to decipher what is the values that they want to adopt and the values that they want to reject or challenge. And we also need to help them to form their own opinions, so that comes through enabling them to develop critical thinking, to be creative, to have the ability to problem solve. All of those things are integral skills to developing the values that we really want to impart to young people. And this is why precisely it's important to complement what's happening inside the classroom with what needs to happen outside the classroom. So we need to make sure that young people have opportunities to demonstrate their values through community service, through volunteering, through enabling them to express themselves in a safe and harmonious environment. All of those can be structured and can be free-flowing, but they can work hand in hand with the education system.
So you mentioned family as being, that was the first venue you mentioned. And of course, I think we would all agree the family is the core facilitator and enabler of values learning. Just for the sake of the audience, I think it's important that we just clarify a little bit about values and some of those behaviors you talked about, like volunteering. Value is an abstract idea. I mean, you don't see values. You only see values in the behaviors that people enact. So I think it's important to know that values, culture's values are really about commonly held beliefs that are considered desirable and proper by a particular society, while cultural norms are the established behaviours that reflect those values. Would you agree with that?
I do,
Okay.
but I do believe that good values could be somewhat universal. I think that's the premise or the remit around which this curriculum was created.
Okay.
And I do believe that cultural norms need to evolve without trespassing on religion to be able to allow students and others to embody and act upon these values.
So I'm just going to pick up again something else you said, Maisa, which is you talked about a structured program, which is what moral education program is. It's quite structured. And Your Excellency, your ideas about taking students out to museums and to archaeological sites is also structured. But the core of the business of values learning takes place in the family, which is seldom structured, which is messy and noisy and lots of activity. Can either of you share examples of where values learning can take place in the family unit? Maybe, Maisa, do you?
Well, as a parent, and I think about that all the time, and obviously I do my job in ensuring that my children have the correct values. But I think that if we connect it back to what this session is about and how you can structure it in activities that are supporting the family, so we're seeing increasingly volunteer programs for young people that the whole family can participate in, or that the family can actually, just by creating the space and the incentive, supporting the young person to actually participate in volunteer activities. I mean, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid has declared this the year of giving. And it is a great year to be talking about that and to be ensuring that it's not just something that adults do, but that children do. And the family's role in that is to make sure that that's a value that's embedded, because volunteering is a value, from an early age, and creating safe environments for them to be able to do that. And if I take it back to our experience right now and looking at the scholarship students that we're supporting, many of them were, the concept of volunteering and taking time away from their education was a bit uncomfortable for them, was a bit foreign to them. They were worried about whether they'd be able to maintain their grades. They were worried about whether they would find the right opportunity for them, whether somebody would support them in delivering that. But once we provided a structured environment for it, once we provided the incentives, they took it up in a big way and are now really running with it. And we're seeing more and more students encouraged to do that. So I'm really focusing on the idea of volunteering because I think it brings together so many of the values and the characters that we're talking about in this moral education.
Okay, thank you. It seems to me that we teach children every day in our ordinary daily encounters values. For example, how we treat each other in the family in the morning, how we treat home help and the people that are in our house to help us, how we interact with shops and in restaurants, how we behave when we're stressed. And so coming to the point of role models, Your Excellency, how do you see role models as being an important enabler of values learning?
I think role models goes without saying. Having a role model, it's very important. But having a role model that is going to allow you to connect, as a student, connect with them. And connection only happens, I think, is if you build a genuine relationship built on, the role model showing their vulnerability. You see, I think this is where I say we need to evolve, and this is where I say we are evolving. I think children today are much smarter than they were, I think, my generation or the generation before. So for someone to accept what you've achieved and what you've learned and to accept what you are preaching, you need to show them where you were, that dark place you were in before you found that light. That is where you show that you're a human being, you're vulnerable, and that's how I believe a child will connect with you. Having said that, I think parents are the most important role models, and I think parents, it is the job of educators, principals, and teachers to ensure that parents do buy into the challenge that everyone in this room has taken upon themselves, because they are going to echo what these children see and learn at school. I think, last but not least, one has to say that there is one role model who's learnings from are timeless in a sense, and that's the late founder, the late Sheikh Zayed, peace be, Allah yarhamah. It's very important for children today to be exposed to what we were exposed to, 40 years ago, 30 years ago. Be it through the content that they can consume, the videos, the speeches, and also for the educators, the role models, the parents and the teachers to always remind them, Sheikh Zayed did this, Sheikh Zayed said that. That in itself, will take them a very long way in terms of achieving what we set out to do today. So if I want to say role models, yes, they are important, but the most important role model of all is the late Sheikh Zayed.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's go back 40, 50 years, shall we?
Sure.
To the traditional society that lived here. Their world was pretty much bounded by the house, the walls of the family house, and then possibly the boundaries around the village or the hamlet in which they lived. And news would filter in through people coming and going. They didn't really hear a lot about what was happening outside of the world, out of their world. And then, as you mentioned, the social media, now the world comes storming, rushing in to their homes, through their laptops, through their phones. Maisa, the question for you is, how important is it for the family unit to explain and to resolve those images, those stories that come from outside? How important is that?
I think it's increasingly crucial. I don't know a single parent or teacher or educator who's not concerned about what young people are accessing online and what they're putting out online as well. The boundaries of what is private versus what is public. Who do you communicate with? How do you express your thoughts? How do you filter what is fact and what is not fact? Those conversations need to be had, and I think that as as educators, we also have a responsibility to educate ourselves, to become more media literate. And when you look at the title of this session and what we're trying to talk about is what kinds of skills do young people need to have nowadays in order to be able to not only enter the job market, but to be able to become leaders and to be leaders who have ethics and values, is that we need to equip them with the kinds of skills that are necessary to have for them to survive, that are different than the skills that we were taught when we were in school. So media literacy, digital literacy becomes extremely important. So does flexibility and adaptability. They're going to have to adapt much more than we ever did. They're going to have multiple careers. They're going to have to deal with very different challenges than we dealt with. And technology plays a very important part, not only in presenting that as a challenge, but also part of the solutions that can be presented. So this is why, in part, technology can play that role between connecting the school and the community and the greater global community. Because essentially, what we're trying to do is connect the dots for the young person. We're trying to get them to understand that what's happening in the classroom is relevant to what's happening in their home, in their community, but also relevant to the global community. So essentially, they have a greater responsibility than we ever did. Sure. And I would just say that, we talk about those things in sort of, we take them for granted, but I know that, principals are concerned about how do we deal with this on top of everything else that we have to deal with in terms of the learning outcomes that we need to produce, in terms of the skills that our teachers need to continuously upgrade themselves with. But it's really important to know that these values and this moral education is part and parcel of what education is about. It's not an added on, it's not a new requirement. I think that the idea here is becoming more crystal clear about the outcomes that you want to have. And if we see it that way, then the solutions are gonna come a lot more easily, a lot more accessible. And I would just say finally on this is that we really need to understand that there's a growing community of organizations, of foundations like ours who are very interested in working with the school community, in supporting principals and supporting the students in ways that would make it easier to reinforce this type of education. So it's not so much extracurricular activities, but think of it as co-curricular, as reinforcing what you're already trying to teach.
Okay. Thank you. Your Excellency, do you have anything to add to Maisa's comments?
I can't add much, but if you'll allow me, I very much like the concept of media literacy. I think it's very avant-garde. It's very much needed. I think today there's a lot of content coming to us, and if I would just look at it with an economic sort of magnifying glass, there's a supply and there's the demand. The demand of content comes from our children, ourselves, and all of that. So we have to teach ourselves, I agree, how to consume this content. But also on the supply side, I think, just thinking outside the box, we're way overdue in terms of looking at how content is produced, how to incentivize media producers, be it movie producers or people who tweet. How do we incentivize them to produce content that falls in line or adheres to what we're teaching with moral education? Isn't it about time that parental guidance on these movies evolves? Right now, it only stands for vulgarity and violence. Maybe we should have some other kind of rating where it also delves into moral education, and maybe we can start ranking and grading them. So that's, I think, on the media side. Technology, I'm very, very interested in the gamification of education. And I think that is something that we can explore to further increase students' interests in learning more about moral education, of course, other topics in a sense. And gamification can be observed in many, many already real-life examples. There's a museum in Scandinavia that talks about the environment, and it's a virtual reality. The children come in there, and they come in and they're in a game. They're standing in a small room, and all you can see is discarded fish nets and whatnot, and you see fish trapped under the nets. And then a kid, there's a narrator that walks them through this experience, and then every time the child with his hand removes a net and frees a fish, he's cheered by the system. And then he's told as well why what he did was good for the environment. So there are very much innovative ways out there today to help supplement these things using media consumption, sort of improvement techniques, literacy, as well as technology, gamification of learning, and things along these lines.
Great answers from both of you. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to our second question. And I'm just warning, it's a difficult one. If schools are a fishbowl living inside a bigger fishbowl, which we call the community, we hope there's general alignment between the curriculum and what's happening out in the community. For example, UAE is a traditional society and there are strongly held cultural and religious values and beliefs. And yet last week, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed was urging a group of Emiratis, I think you were at that meeting, urging Emiratis to look outwards to other societies like Finland, Singapore, even my country, New Zealand, for answers to their economic success. But I think he was hinting at something maybe a little deeper. So my question is this, and I'll start with you, Your Excellency. Does values learning involve a considered choice, or are some values non-negotiable?
I'll have to answer this, but subjectively, as safe and not. I personally believe that some values are non-negotiable, but I do believe that one should be given the opportunity to obtain or adopt these values. Honesty, you cannot lie or half lie. You're either truthful or you're not. But at a younger age, I can teach you, sort of why it is important to be honest, why integrity is important. For me, what would raise an alarm if I was a teacher in class is if a student cheated and 5 others knew about it, but they did not, tell or inform on them. Then that means that these people, although they did not cheat, but they're okay with that, and that already trespasses on the concept of the value of honesty, let's call it, or whatever it is. So I do not think that they're gray values, they're black or white, but I think that we have a responsibility towards each other and towards students to help, and I'm talking about the universal ones,
Okay.
which is, I think, most of them. So that's my, I think, 2 pence on this.
Okay, thank you. Maisara,
Thank you.
choice or set in stone? What's your take?
No, I think it's less about, what values we're teaching. I think we all generally have an agreement on the importance of values and what values we're trying to embed in our young people. But I think it's the how that's, the most challenging part. And, we've all tried this, right? With a child, we say, sugar is bad for you, but they still love sugar, So just telling a young person that something is bad or right, or you should do this, is not enough. We need to be convincing, and we need to really be able to be persuasive and creative in the way that we reach out to them. So this is why what happens outside of the classroom is so critical. It provides the opportunity for that young person to test out some of those ideas, to try to experience what it's like to live a real life situation where they have to actually make a judgment on a value, to make a decision that would really test them at their core on whether they understand whether the decision they're making is correct or not correct, what impact it would have on another person, whether it will, it will put those values to the test. So simulation, gamification is one way of doing it, but there are much simpler and easy ways to do that in the community, in real life situations with, whether it's working with the elderly or supporting the environment or having debates where you have 2 opposing views and seeing how they can come together, how they debate them, where they draw the line. So there are lots of different ways that the community can support the school in ensuring that those values are brought to life.
Okay, thank you. So let's stay focused on the KEF, the how, okay, for now. Back to you, Your Excellency. And again, focusing on the how. And it raises a couple of examples you gave at the beginning, school visits to archaeological sites and workshops. So what can schools do to really facilitate moral education and values-based learning that reflects the outside world? How do they do it in the classroom?
In the classroom.
In the classroom. How do they bring the outside into the inside?
I think it starts with the curriculum, and that's a given. But then it's about how you teach, right? I think if you're talking about in the classroom, teachers are the ultimate role models. They're the ultimate communicators of this knowledge. And I'm going to come back to teachers in a second. But I also think that, and I don't know if this is being done, I think there are talks about it, it's about the concept of moral education being taught or conveyed in all subjects taught. Not directly, but if you're teaching, and it's an example I use with my colleagues who are organizing this event. So if you're teaching, I don't know, 6th grader about photosynthesis in a science class, sun plus water grows a plant and things along these lines, then the onus is also on the teacher to come and tell the child, you know, this is how a plant grows, but also talks to the child in that same discussion about the importance of taking care of the environment. So the responsibility sits on every single teacher out there, regardless of whether they're teaching that subject, particularly, or any other subject. I think that's one, and I think teachers are the ultimate role models, and I assume teachers should always be accessible by students. I very much like what was said a couple of sessions ago about teachers being accessible. If a child has found a comfort zone in one of his teachers or her teachers, then that channel should be leveraged to the maximum in a sense, because believe it or not, that channel could be much stronger than the channel between the child and his parent. So these are some of the examples that I have.
Okay, thank you. Maisa, you come from a STEM background, correct? In science recently, science education, they're using a methodology called ethical dilemma scenarios, where basically you take students through a story, and at various pivotal points along the story, you ask them to make a decision. And there's no right or wrong answers. Do you see that approach working well within this particular curriculum?
No, absolutely. This is what I was talking about earlier in terms of simulation, is giving real life situations in which young people have to make a judgment call about how they would approach a situation, and using problem solving techniques, being creative, collaboration, being able to collaborate with others in order to come to the right decision, to come to the amicable solutions. Those are very critical. We talked about how the classroom can support it, and I think one of the best ways that can be done is moving away from traditional teaching, from lecturing, where a child is just listening to an adult tell them this is how it works. Increasingly, it's very important to put the child in charge of what they're learning, to move away from the lecturing process to the experience process, where the child is actually telling you what they've learned or why they've decided something, and what they're thinking, what's worrying them. That's so important to listen to, why they think something is important, whether it's talking about, the environment or culture or heritage, and walking through that process of thinking, trying to understand where they're stuck and where you can help them get unstuck. That's all critical process. So the idea of sort of flipping the classroom so that the young person is in charge of the process, and the teacher is the facilitator, the supporter, the person that helps them navigate, if you will. So yes, they're an important role model, but increasingly they're also an enabler. They're an empowerer of young people. Those are concepts that are critical to the process of adopting, the values that are embedded in this moral education.
Thank you. Thank you. Look, thank you very much, Maisa Dialbout and Your Excellency Saif Said Kabash, for joining us here today. We've just literally dipped our toes into the water with this topic.
Thank you for having us.
We could spend much longer, but on behalf of the audience, I'd like to thank you both for joining us on the panel. So thank you very much.
Shukran.